Hello, this is John Feldt, and this is the weekly water outlook for May 26, 2013. Well, now that we're getting close to summer, I'm going to be talking a lot about what we call mesoscale type precipitation patterns. And these are very small in area. Now, during the winter months and spring, we've had these widespread rain events, and I'm going to be talking about one today. But more and more, they're going to become either mesoscale, which is a smaller area, or microscale. And what we heard about in the San Antonio over the last couple days with over 10 inches of rain, and matter of fact, this shows that area of purple is nearly 14 inches of rain. Look how small this is. This is developed right over San Antonio, and it really didn't extend anywhere further. And that's a microscale type event. They're very hard to forecast at all by models. Weather models tend to predict the synoptic scale and maybe the mesoscale from time to time, but not the microscale unless you get into very small scale models. And I do look at those small scale models as we get into extreme events, and that's not likely to pick out one of these type events many hours in advance of it actually occurring. So the setup we see this week, we see a very significant feed of moisture as we go through Oklahoma and Texas, and this is one of the reasons why the precipitation formed in San Antonio is very deep-seated moisture. You've heard me talk about precipitable water a whole bunch. It's one of my favorite parameters because it shows the potential for heavy rain. If you have moisture just at the Earth's surface, but not aloft, you won't get as much rain. You might get severe weather, but not as much heavy rain. If your precipitable water is over 1.5 inches, you can get very heavy rain. So the area in dark green here, you can see that feed of precipitable water that extends from Texas into southeast Oklahoma. And then if we look further up to the north, we see it extends well up to through the Midwest. The arrows there are the moisture transport. So we see that those long arrows are saying there's a real good feed of moisture up into the Midwest, parts of Missouri, Kansas, southeast Nebraska, and a very large part of Iowa. And that's going to be a clue to where some of the heaviest rain is going to occur over the upcoming week. Now, there's another factor that we always need to keep an eye on, and that's temperature gradients. Now, I'm getting back to the synoptic scale. Again, this is the big scale. And if you look here, these are the cooler temperatures right in here, the yellows and greens, and these are the warmer temperatures, the reds. And look at this boundary right here. Right along that boundary with cold air to the north and warm air to the south, when you get those temperature contrasts along those boundaries are where you'd expect the heaviest rainfall to occur. Okay, now before I talk about the upcoming week, let's look back at last week. This is the actual precipitation that occurred, and if you're a regular listener to the Weekly Water Outlook, you're seeing these graphics look a lot more, I don't know what you'd call it, sort of scratchy looking, and that becomes because we're getting into spring and summer. The patterns aren't as much synoptically driven as they are mesoscale and even microscale, so we're getting a lot more summer type convection, pop-up thunderstorms, not as much organization, and that's what we see. But you can see that the most organized precipitation extended along that feed of moisture from Texas and Oklahoma up into the Midwest, as well as the upper tier of the Midwest. Over the eastern U.S. and the southeast U.S., it was very scattered, not much at all in Alabama, scattered in parts of Georgia, and then a little bit more persistent in the Carolinas. If we look at the percent of normal, again, this really sort of stands out here from what we saw in the winter time. Look at the areas of red and green. It's really a patchwork here. But if you look at the most consistent blues and purples, you see that the heaviest rain was over the upper Midwest, North Dakota, into Minnesota, and then down along that axis of heavy precipitation. Areas in red indicate dry conditions, and if you look at West Texas in particular, you see that there was some welcome rainfall over the far western parts of the state, even though the northwest part of the state remained quite dry. Now, I show this from time to time. This is the departure from normal. This is in inches of precipitation, where blues and greens are above normal amounts of rain or excess rain. Areas in yellow are below normal amounts of rain. You can see in Alabama was pretty much Alabama and parts of Tennessee. They lost about an inch or up to 2 inches of rainfall percentage, or actually not percentage, inches of rain departure over the week. And you see in Oklahoma, southeast Oklahoma, that was the area that received the most surplus rainfall. That was anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of surplus rainfall over the week. You can also see significant surpluses over parts at the very far upper Midwest, including North Dakota into Minnesota. Okay, so let's look at the jet stream. I think it's developed pretty much as I described last week. Right now, the jet stream early this week is going to be sort of zipping out of the southwest U.S. up into the Midwest, and that's the final ingredient. I talked about the temperature gradient, I talked about the availability of moisture, and now it's upper atmospheric energy. And along that blue line, that is going to be where we're going to have upper air impulses of energy tracking, and that's going to help form precipitation over the upper Midwest. By late in the week, it lifts up to the north, and that's going to bring definitely a feel to summer over large parts of the nation while continuing precipitation in other areas. But that's going to be somewhat significant as we get late in the week. So here's the precipitation forecast for the next 7 days. Very high amounts of rainfall centered over Iowa, and then in that northerly tract. This has been somewhat of a persistent trend. I forecast this last week. I said it would probably continue into the second week. Now we're into that second week, and you can see it is continuing. Over Oklahoma, you can also see fairly widespread rains, but I think it's going to be more scattered. And then as we get into Texas, even more scattered, but with a little bit of luck, we could get a little bit more rain into western parts of the state than we've seen for a while, and that would, like I said, be welcome in that area that's been very dry. On the other hand, the southeast U.S. and the southwest U.S. look very dry this week, and actually for the next following week it looks dry as well in those areas. Now, I wanted to show from a standpoint of soils, and brown are the dry soils. I wanted to sort of give you some indication where the heaviest rain, and that's that area with the red dashed line, is going to fall. And what we want is we really want that heavier rain to fall over the area that's brown. So we want the heavier rain to fall over western parts of Nebraska, central and western parts, and western South Dakota, large parts of Kansas. Unfortunately, it looks like it's going to fall over areas that are already fairly wet, and this could cause some agricultural problems due to very wet soils and ponding of water, especially over Iowa. Also parts of North Dakota. So what we've seen here is, even though there's been some improvement over South Dakota and Nebraska with rainfall, the more significant rain has been in areas that have already been fairly wet. So these are the trends and threats as we get right through the end of May into the first part of June, June 11th. Took a model output and ran it all the way through with all the rainfall potential through there. And definitely we see a very strong signal for that wet weather from the upper tier of the Midwest, from parts of almost all of North Dakota, northern part of South Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin into Iowa. And that's going to be the very strong trend for heavy rainfall. And then it's going to extend into parts of eastern parts of Nebraska, northeast Kansas, north Missouri, northern Illinois, perhaps into parts of Michigan as well. Another strong trend is the very dry weather over the southwest U.S., high confidence in that continuing, and over the southeast U.S., generally below normal. It doesn't look like it's not going to necessarily be all the way dry, but it definitely looks like it's going to trend either below normal or well below normal right through the early part of June. Between these two, where that moisture feed is, there could be some scattered thunderstorms, primarily developing over north central Texas into Oklahoma. Still looks like South Texas and West Texas is going to be trending dry after perhaps early this week, but we'll have to see on that because it is in that axis of heavier moisture. If we look at the 8 to 14 day outlook, it doesn't look like a whole lot of change right now. On the left are the temperature outlooks. The red is above normal, blue is below normal, and the green is a precipitation forecast. And I mentioned that as of late this week, that jet stream will be lifting north. Well, that's going to dry out, most likely Oklahoma, Texas, and the southwest U.S. In that 8 to 14 day period. But with the jet stream up to the north, that's going to keep that area fairly active, not just this week, but right through the first week in June. So, like I said, I have a concern for soil moisture, and the blues here, especially the darker blues, show very significant increases in soil moisture in the areas I mentioned. Now, in Texas, that's probably very welcome. Parts of Kansas perhaps as well. But then when we get into northern Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, North Dakota, that's not quite as welcome, and especially that area in Iowa, there is some concern on there that it's already on the wet side, and with that it's going to be very soggy once this next rain event moves through. So I'd like to, first of all, thank all of our veterans and their families for the sacrifices they make for our nation on this Memorial Day. It's very much appreciated. Takeaway points for this week's briefing. Continued active Midwest. The concern right now is too much rain in those areas. The longer-term trend looks like it's going to continue. It won't be every day, but it looks like above normal precipitation or well above normal precipitation right into early June. Dry over the southwest U.S. and below normal precipitation over the southeast U.S. Very dry over the western U.S. I'd like to thank you for listening to this week's briefing. I will be issuing information throughout the week, including my newsletter coming up not too far down the road. I have some interesting observations and information on long-term drought impacts. And if not, I will be talking to you again next weekend. Have a nice week.